Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have flown under the radar and passed most people by. Today, we're going to be talking about The Phantom, a 1996 superhero movie starring Billy Zane, based on Lee Falk's comic strip. But of course, discussing this movie with me is, I should mention, I forgot to say, I'm Derek McDuff, your host. But with me, even more important than that, is the man himself, JPG. How's it going, man?
How we doing?
We are doing very well. Where things are going well. We just, as the time that people are listening to this, yesterday we got back from Comic-Con. I'm sure we had a great time.
Yeah. I'm sure everything went beautifully and nothing went wrong.
Right? Yep. Especially that first day where you and I were on a panel together. It went great. It went amazing.
Yeah. I can't believe we had 2,000 people in that room.
Right? It was crazy. They had to turn people away. They said it's full. Sorry.
Wild, right? There were like babies crying in the street. It was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing. But good news for those babies is that we did record the podcast, so it's going to be coming out as a bonus episode later on. So stay tuned for that, for all the babies who had to miss out. But yeah, man, JPG, other than our Comic-Con adventures, what do you want to let the people know about?
That's a good question, man. So, I am JPG. I am a pop culture educator and consultant. I run the consultancy firm Intermyth, where we help marginalized communities either launch content creation into the pop culture space, or we help content creators get to the next level. And so, we've known each other for forever personally.
Oh yeah, we go way back.
Yeah, and I like to, I love saying this on shows whenever you're on here with me. I made two friends in college. One was Derek, the other I married. And honestly, it was touch and go as to which one it was going to be anyway, right?
He just beat me out. It was close, you know? I thought I had you for a second, but Alex is a good woman, so... No.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, it has been... I'm going to be a little bit heartfelt here, especially because we're coming back from Comic-Con as well. But Derek, dude, just to get to see you in the space, in order to see you grow and put out these incredible shows, dude, if you aren't proud of yourself, know that I am proud for the both of us.
You know, I'm blushing, man. Thank you so much. That means a lot. Yeah, it's been a ride. It's been a real fun time, you know. And thank you for, for all you've definitely been there for me as I've been on this journey. So I appreciate that. Great friend. Anybody out there who's listening, hit this man up. Give him your services because they will not be wasted. But yeah, man.
Yeah. I should probably say, in order to find me, intermyth.org, or and my email would be on there directly as well too. So yeah, intermyth.org, or on social media at intermyth_.
Yep. So hit that up. Yeah, you were the first guest on Underrated. I don't know if you realize that, way back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, when we had not figured things out, but it was the beginning of the journey. But it's crazy to think of the journey that this podcast has been on. Because
I'm still a little bit salty that you didn't have me on for Speed Racer.
Well, that was our first ever episode. So
I know.
We didn't even realize you could have guests at that point. We were just like, what? Oh, man. But yeah, I mean, we're getting you on for The Phantom, though, which is just a classic and a movie that I have loved my entire life, or at least, since I was 6 years old, I guess, when it came out. This has been a big staple. And it's a movie I've been wanting to have you on for a while because you mentioned it way back. And The Phantom's a big movie for me. And when I heard you liked it as well, I was excited to talk about it with you. So, why was this such an important movie to you? Why did you want to pick this one?
So, with The Phantom, and, of course, The Phantom being a comic strip first and then moving into the comics after that, comic books has always been my bread and butter whenever when I first got into the pop culture content space, right? I had a podcast, first and foremost, where we talked about comic books. I learned how to read from comic books. It helped me a lot with learning the English language. This comics has always been one of my, I mean, probably my most favorite thing in the pop culture space, right? So, do you remember when we were younger and if we saw one comic book movie, we would just lose our minds?
Right. Yeah. It was like now it's like they come out with like a Cloak and Dagger show, and you're like, whatever, like all
Oh
that.
God. Okay.
Which,
I
by
wanted
the way,
that to
I do
be
love.
so much better.
I actually liked it a lot. I'm not gonna lie, I do like that show a lot. But like now, my point is like, there's so much. Like now, it's like whatever. There's a comic book movie like 5 times a year or whatever. Like Sony's making a Craven the Hunter fucking movie, whatever. But like back in the day, it was like, oh wow, this is a special thing. So I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so around this time frame, we had the Rocketeer, we had the Shadow come out. Gosh, I know that there's a few other ones that I'm missing right now. Oh my gosh, well, I had like a
I mean,
list
Teenage
in my
Mutant
head.
Ninja Turtles.
Yes, yeah, Turtles came out as well, which is always funny for me because I experienced the Turtles through cartoons, and then I
Hmm,
went back to the comics, and that's a jarring experience.
interesting. Yeah, that's the and then of course we got to mention Batman. The first couple
And of
Batman movies.
course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually at the time of this recording, I'm prepping to do a 1989 Batman rewatch right
Okay,
now.
nice.
So yes, I'm very excited for that. So the Phantom has always held a very special place in my heart because this was during that dearth of like no superheroes whatsoever on
Hmm.
on the big screen. I know my
Hmm.
I know my thought process for wanting to talk about this film. What about you, though, man?
Yeah, no, because like I said, this is a kind of childhood classic for me. And you also brought up The Rocketeer, which is one of the first movies we covered way back in the day. And so it was in that same vein of just kind of these. They're I know The Rocketeer is more contemporary, but they're both like set in like the 30s. And I love these kind of pulpy movies, right?
Yeah,
That felt
I like to call it pre-Nazi time. You know,
all right.
it's
It's like
always 1938. Like 1938, some shit went down,
right, you're like,
right?
watch out for this Hitler. He's a bad egg, like that whole thing.
Yeah, but then there's also like ghosts you can fist fight, and I don't know. It just there's something about that time frame that pulls the best like good guys are good, bad guys are bad sort of mentality, right?
Right. And honestly, because I was also raised on the Indiana Jones movies, which the first three had all come out. Like I was born just a couple months after the end of that trilogy.
Don't tell me
In
that, Derek. Don't tell me that.
Listen, all right, 89. I barely made it in the 80s, but still counts. But this there was obviously no Indiana Jones movie in the 90s, so it felt like The Rocketeer and The Phantom were my kind of Indiana Jones movies of the 90s because they had that same I know there's not like Nazis in it, but the same like we're punching bad guys, we're globe trotting around the world to get artifacts, and this honestly felt like a perfect combination of Indiana Jones and Batman. It felt like the studios, like whatever they saw those two movies, they're like these movies were both huge hits in 1989. What do we have that we have the rights to? We've got this thing called the Phantom. It seems to be kind of the best of both worlds with that. And for me, it really is. It really captures everything I love both about the comics and Batman and him being like the great crusader who's actually a secret millionaire who goes and fights crime, but somebody who globetrots around the world and is trying to like get this skull back from this evil maniacal guy. And just as a kid, I loved this movie. And it wasn't until later on that I learned that people don't really like this one. And I was kind of shocked when I found that out because this is a movie I would rewatch religiously. I even made little paper mache skulls, and I was like, I've got to have the three skulls or whatever. I was like I was like Xander Drax. I was like, I've got to get all the skulls, and I painted them. I was like, here's the green one, here's the gold one, here's the silver one. So this was a big movie for me during my childhood. Did you know about the movie with people not liking it like early on, or did you find that out later?
For me, I got the sense that people just weren't interested because when I talked about the film at school, and I was pretty young when this came out. When I
Mhm.
talked about the film at school, nobody ever knew what I was talking about. And on top of that, I'm sure somebody on the internet is going to correct me, but 7-Eleven was actually doing a promo at this point where they
Okay.
gave out the Phantom's rings.
Interesting. I would have
Yeah.
loved to have had one of
So,
those.
I had a family member who worked at a 7-Eleven, and she knew how much I loved this film, so she would like grab the rings for me. And to my memory, I'm pretty sure that they were metal.
Whoa, that's like high class for
I
7-Eleven.
know for 7-Eleven, and you like got it if you like bought a Slurpee or something.
Mhm.
Something somebody is going to correct me on the internet, but I know it was some sort of like convenience store sort of like
Right.
giveaway, right? But oh man, and with the Phantom, right? Like I wanted to go back to something that you said because you talked about that combination of Indiana Jones and Batman, and
Mhm.
we forget that we owe a lot to what things like Superman and what Batman is to pulp comics like the Phantom,
Right.
right? And I mean even further than that, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Zorro at this point.
Yeah.
Because if Zorro didn't exist, none of the cool things that we love exist at this point.
Yeah, honestly, like there's so much reverence paid to Zorro in Batman specifically. Like a lot of times his parents will be going to see like the Mask of Zorro, something like that, and that's where they end up dying, or the Mark of Zorro, whichever one lines up chronologically for the correct thing.
Do you think then canonically Bruce Wayne, like little kid Bruce Wayne, had a thing for Catherine Zeta Jones like all of us did?
Dude, yeah, I think that checks out. Like I think that little it would be the Robert Pattinson Batman, right? Because he would have been the right age to watch Antonio Banderas' Mask of Zorro, and he would have seen Catherine Zeta-Jones in one of her early films. But of course, before she was in that, she was in this, and yeah, like I was like, who is this lady? She is nice, and she's not nice. She's mean and she's pretty. Not like the lady who is nice and pretty in this, but there's major like thruple vibes in this. Am I just reading too much of it? Because I love that
You are
line where
not.
she's
You are not,
right.
right? Because I think at the most there is a very heterosexual couple with
Mhm.
a boyfriend that is very excited that they're together now.
Oh yeah,
Like that's the very least, right? If I am a vengeance driven ancestral superhero where I need to secure having a child, there's no way we're just gonna have one partner at this point,
gotta
right?
maximize your odds. Christy
And
Swanson
like
and Catherine Zeta. Let's
and,
go.
and in the first place, why, as the Phantom, why are you not having like 11 kids to just pass on the Phantom mantle?
Right,
And then
right,
those kids have kids and all of that. And so you just have a full network of pirate hating two-fisted superheroes.
right. Because you kind of want to maximize your odds. Phantoms don't have that long a lifespan because they're on what I think the 20. He's the 20th or 21st Phantom.
22nd or 23rd.
Okay. And they've
Yeah.
been going for 400 years, which if you do the math, that's not a huge
It's not a lot.
span for
Yeah.
phantoms to be phantoming, especially when you're like oh yeah, like the pirate guy they meet at the end when they go to that pirate lair, the guy from Mortal Kombat, and he's like, many of us have
You
killed the
whoa.
phantom.
Whoa. You mean Kerry Hiroyuki Tagawa?
Yeah,
The
he's a
guy
goat.
from Mortal Kombat? I will fight you on the show.
Okay, are you gonna pretend that he's not incredible in that movie?
Look, okay. So CHT is just incredible in everything he does. Like
Yeah.
you have to understand, dude. I mean, we see him in the opening dream sequence of Mortal Kombat. We see him, no joke. I made sure to look this up myself at an hour and 15 minutes into this film. An hour, and that is just we should have just introduced him and had him through the whole film, right? It's wild. I cannot believe that we didn't have them for that long, right? I mean, dudes in Planet of the Apes, Tekken. I don't even know where to start, man.
I mean, he's
Just
also in like
recently.
Memoirs of a Geisha and like actual like prestige movies, but to
Oh
me,
yeah,
he was the guy from the Phantom growing up.
So how do you want to do this? Do we get right into the film? Do we go beginning to end?
No, let's just go
How do
into
we want to
no
do this?
particular order. Let's just go into like what are some things that stuck out to you about this movie? Maybe upon rewatch or just in general.
You are going to be very mad at me
Okay.
because I think because of time and context, this movie lost a little bit of its magic.
Oh.
Mostly because it just have you seen Christy Swanson just like out in the wild? Just
I have not. I have not.
okay.
No, I've not had the pleasure.
You are not going to enjoy her politics. I'm just going to
Oh
tell you that.
no.
Most recent films with Dean Cain. One of her most recent films is from a couple years ago with Dean Cain called Obamagate.
Well, that's a bummer. That's a bummer.
I'm
But hey,
I have to tell you this, right? Like I have to
That's-
make sure,
that's
right?
good context to have. Hey, Catherine Zeta-Jones seems unproblematic. Billy Zane, the worst thing he ever did was pretend to be the bad guy in Titanic, as far as I'm aware.
Catherine Zeta-Jones could run over my wife, and I would still, I would apologize to her at this point.
And even there's the late great Treat Williams, who God
Ugh,
rest his soul just recently passed away.
yes,
He is chewing some scenery in this movie. He is one of like his bad guy performance. He is having so much fun, like just shooting laser beams out of skulls and throwing spears in the backs of like guys from The Godfather and shit. Like this guy understands the assignment.
Treat Williams came into this production playing it completely straight, like Raul Julia in Street Fighter level straight, right? Like just as straight as possible. But then there are a couple times where the mask slips, and you can just tell he's having too much fun.
He's so great, and then I love his like secondhand man or whatever, the guy who's like actually in the Pirates or whatever, James Raymar's character.
Oh yeah, James Remar's character Quill. Yeah. So man, and I mean like James Remar is one of those actors that is literally in everything. Also in Mortal Kombat, by the way.
Right, yeah. A lot of Mortal Kombat alum, or I guess this came out around the same time. I don't remember which one came out first technically.
I also remember seeing Billy Zane on film in this like in this movie, and I just remembered like how jacked he was.
Dude,
And you don't see that level of bodybuilding in those early 90s and those mid 90s superhero films, right?
right, they would
kind
just
of
put like
rely
a
on the
suit on Keaton or whatever.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
They rely on the suit. And Billy Zane's like, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And like one of his first scenes is just shirtless and jacked reading books.
I think that scene just exists because he's like, dude, I worked out for years and I didn't eat a carb. I need to show this off at some point in the movie and show them it's not the purple suit.
Yeah, and this is pre Marvel workouts.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You don't have guys going out with the ropes and everything.
But I do have to say, you know, with everybody, I thought everybody was incredible. And then I watched Christy Swanson and you know, politics aside, right? I would have to say she is the weakest link in the entirety of the film.
Yeah, she's maybe the person who doesn't get the assignment because I feel like everyone else knows what movie they're in. Where they bring because it's not like a total tongue-in-cheek, like, look at this dumb thing we're in. But it realizes in the same way that Indiana Jones does so well that this is a throwback to a kind of genre of movie that doesn't really get made anymore, and it has reverence for it, but it also realizes this is a movie that's coming out in the 90s. It's updated a lot, and you got to kind of like get on the movie's level. And I think that Billy Zane and everyone else involved really do, and maybe not her quite as much.
I would say with Christy Swanson, there were times that Diana Palmer as a character, I felt had to have a certain minimum of lines in order to be in the film, because she has some line deliveries. She has a few line deliveries in this where I deeply question, okay, was this the best take? Do you remember the scene when she comes back home into Palmer Mansion, and she's talking to her, like, the guy who thinks he's her boyfriend, which is weird in and of itself.
Right.
But she makes a sandwich And then there's like an ending part of that scene where like very quietly he's like, "What kind of sandwich is that?" And the way that she delivers bologna is the weirdest cadence and the weirdest choice for an actress at that point.
Hmm. Yeah, it's bizarre. There's like I think there's a few things about this movie that are maybe a little bit dated, where it is, it's still doing that throwback to the 30s thing, but I found most of it to be pretty charming in a way where it was like, yeah, we've updated this. It's still this interesting throwback, and it existed in a time where I do like that it had special effects. They were doing a good thing, but it was really nice to see a lot of practical shit. It was nice to see things getting blown up. It was nice to see a man jump off a biplane onto a horse while a plane blew up in the background. That was so refreshing.
And for me, I think there are so many small detailed touches that never get talked about or looked at. For
Mhm,
example, Sala, so Catherine Zeta-Jones's character, right?
mhm.
It is heavily implied that she is taking in women pilots in order to teach them how to fend for themselves due to things like sexual assault or abuse or something like that. It's very there's that underlying, okay, it's all women in her crew,
Mm.
and the second that Diana is in trouble in a way that is overtly sexual, she immediately switches sides. She
Yes.
immediately switches sympathies. And I thought, and if we ever got to remake like a great pulpy Phantom film, I want to know more about Sala and her crew, right? Because we only get the pleasure of Sala from the interrogation scene onward, right? We only get her. We never get the rest of her crew.
Right, and it's one of those things where it's like they really cast the right person. Like they're lucky enough to get a very young Catherine Zeta-Jones, and a character that I think is really well written. Like you said, there's all that interesting stuff with her backstory, and you totally get at the end why she does switch sides. It doesn't feel forced. It feels like that character work is set up earlier with seeing her crew of just like badass women or whatever. And like I love that line where Billy Zane's like, "What is this? A ship full of women?" Because you're seeing all of like her badass lady pirates, whatever they might be. It's awesome, but you're also getting a lot out of just that really great performance where she is elevating this character, and this is a part that who knows if she would have taken this small of a role at a point in her career when she was like a little more famous or whatever. But it's one of those things they really captured right person at the right time, and it feels like we've kind of harped on the cast a little bit, but I think that this is, with like we said, maybe one exception, a very very well cast movie. I really like the plot of it, and I keep bringing up the connections to Indiana Jones.
Mhm.
I do like it feels even more like a little more modernized with Indiana Jones, because Indiana Jones is always saying famously, "It belongs in a museum," and that's something that over the years we've kind of like looked at like maybe that's not an aspect of the character that has aged well, where he goes in and steals things essentially from other cultures and like let me put this in a museum. There's a line that I noticed this time where the Phantom says he's like he wants to do the opposite of that, where he wants to take this thing that's in a museum. Like someone's like, "Why do you want the skulls?" And he's like, "I want to bring them back to who they belong to." He goes into a museum and he's like, "This is all wrong. Like like this is the British. Like this is the British exhibit." They're like he just doesn't waste any time. He smashes it. He's like, "I want to give these skulls back to the people they belong to." He really cares about these cultures in a way that I'm glad the movie it feels like it could really slip into some white savior things that would be a little bit problematic, and it feels like it for the most part it sidesteps those by having it mostly set in like a big portion of it set in New York. He's not off like let me go save the natives, like do anything like that. I'm glad it avoids for the most part that he's kind of like fighting against these basically just capitalists,
Yeah.
these capitalists who are working hand in hand with gangsters and the corrupt cops of New York City. So I really thought a lot of that stuff aged pretty well.
It's tough too. It's tough too because you have to remember that in the context of the Phantom being created, it was an incredibly different time
Yeah.
socially and culturally and ethnically, right? And and this is what I always point to whenever I talk about representation in media, right? Right now, we have we have these Star Wars quote unquote fans losing their minds over the diversity of casting in The Acolyte right now, right? We've seen this all over the internet. Hopefully, by the time that this airs, everybody loves it, and
We're all
whatever, right?
chill now. Like we're
Yeah,
living in the
yeah.
far off future of late July.
But it's the point of when we were making films in the 80s and the 90s in these fantastical backdrops, we had to have a white person there, right? Because the audience wanted to see somebody who may have been reflective of them, right? And then when we talk about that same move now, where we place a black character or female character or what have you into a more prominent role, then we cry. Then there's a very specific part of the internet that cries about DEI or whatever, right? And they don't see the hypocrisy in, well, back then you had to have a white person or else nobody would be buying a ticket to this, right? And so the fact that now our tastes have changed and we're doing the same exact thing but for another subset of culture is wild to me that you can't see the parallels, right?
Right. Yeah. Like people, it's just amazing how kind of people put their blinders on and they cry about this and that, and it's like, well, you're just doing this, can't like. I wrote a review for that movie Young Woman in the Sea, the very
Mhm.
tongue-in-cheek review, because that movie, the plot of it is, or at least the plot of the first half is that, okay, this was a time period when women were not allowed to swim, and so my review was, wow, more woke propaganda from Disney pushing their pro-woman swimming agenda. Thanks a lot, Kathleen Kennedy. So I totally know what you're saying because whenever I hear the people complaining about that kind of stuff, it feels like that complaint. And I guess sometimes there can be a little bit of course correction where like I think of the stuff like Jasmine's song in Aladdin, and it feels like this is just kind of like corporate, like a way for corporate entities like Disney to feel quote unquote woke and to like seem like they're on the good side and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just like, yeah, this is just you were just telling the same stories that we've always told. It's just the person at the front of it doesn't look like you necessarily, and people get mad at that.
And for me, right, like I'm constantly, even as a kid, I was constantly searching for that representation in, right? I
Mm.
wanted to see somebody who looked like me on screen. Billy Zane, specifically at this time, very unattainable, right? Like there's no way, right? You're not a dude walking down the street looking like Billy Zane, right? But oh gosh, it was Kit Walker's manservant, and I
Mm,
use the term manservant specifically because that's what they were called in the 30s. I'm very sorry.
yeah,
So the person that was helping him out is his name is Gurren, and Gurren was played by Radmar Agano Jao, and specifically a Filipino actor, and specifically a Filipino actor whose mother was a huge film star in Asia.
that's cool. That's
And
rad.
so, like, to get this, like, whoa, wait a minute, I know that accent. I know that look. Like, that is that's somebody like me on screen.
Yeah,
And,
and
we're lucky, right? Like, I got Ernie Reyes Jr. in The Last Dragon. I got, like, I had a few of those like, growing up. And while it was very few and far between, I held on to that sort of stuff. Just another reason why the Phantom is so important to me.
yeah, and I think you're totally right. It's something that a mutual friend of ours I talked about on Kingdom of Heaven with Kurosh,
Mhm.
who we talked about. We really appreciate the casting of that movie. There was a lot of actual Persian actors in it, and they didn't do the thing that Hollywood loves to do, where they're like, "Let's like cast Jake Gyllenhaal, or let's cast but or we'll get like a British Indian guy to be someone who is supposed to be from Iran or whatever it might be." Yeah, the authenticity, I think, even in characters that aren't central, I think really helps a movie like this out.
Mhm. Yeah, it fills the world, right?
Hmm.
I Secondary characters do so much to build the cultural context of the film that you want to enjoy, right?
Right.
My best example of this is so it's Al the cabbie.
He rules.
I
He rules so fucking hard.
Okay. I love the trope that like the loyal cabbie trope,
Hmm.
right? Knows his way around town, no nonsense,
Hmm.
can get you there in the nick of time. It's this secondary character that carries so much of making sure that the plot moves forward. I absolutely love. And so here, right, you get that trope of like, oh, you didn't pay me, right?
Hmm.
And he just gives him jewels.
Yeah.
And it's such a good bit, right? It's
Hmm.
such a good bit, and I think it's John Capodice or Capodice that plays Al the
Hmm.
cabbie. I we need more of that. We need more secondary characters who fill the world for you, who make it feel like the world moves on even after the film is done.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that is really present in this movie is that nobody just comes on and feels like they're just here to say a thing. Like when they go to the pirate lair at the end of the movie, you're like, yeah, you believe these guys have been like living in this cove and sinking ships for 400 years. When there's like these gangsters, you're like, okay, like these guys do feel like they walked off the set of Goodfellas or something, and they're not here to just like say they're through. Like it's like, no, these guys are in their own movie where they're like trying to run the streets in New York, and they're like, "Hey, what's all this skull shit?" Like they feel like that's how like they're not like, "Okay, cool," like just like whatever. We just gotta like, no, like I don't believe any of this. Hulk is like the one guy's like, "Hey, I'm a gangster, but we were choir boys. You were too, Charlie. Come on, let's get the fuck out of here." You know, it feels so authentic, and I think that that is part of the adventure genre that I love about this movie is like you have all these realistic characters kind of reacting in ways like, what is this crazy thing we're going into? And this is a genre that I feel like we don't see enough just kind of pulpy action adventure movies. You still get adventure movies, but
I will I will challenge you on this,
okay,
okay?
please
I
do.
have I have this I have this talking point every time I talk about pulp film or pulp media in general. I love pulp media, right? What's the last film that has come out that you would consider pulp media?
Uh Probably like The Mummy 99 maybe?
Ah, see, The Mummy. It's so good, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's one of my I think it's one of my perfect films of 1999,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed.
And I would say so I would say the last 3 in my head are The Mummy 1999,
Mhm.
the first Pirates of the Caribbean film
That's another
2001,
one, yeah.
and then the last one, and this barely makes it. This barely makes it for me. Is The Rock's Jungle Cruise.
You know, I could see the Jungle Cruise vibes, especially because I did actually guest on a show and review it, and the two movies that I compared that to are the other two you mentioned. It feels like it is intentionally trying to both recapture the vibes of the Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously being another ride based on a Disney movie that is like a period piece, but it also really has the Mummy vibes to the point where even the three characters feel like you have the two characters, the love interest, and you have the goofy brother even. Like it's like
Okay, but honestly, the fact that The Rock and the Goofy brother weren't the couple makes me so mad. It makes me deeply angry.
But you know, in thinking about it for a second, there's one more I might add, and it's interesting because it's the same guy who directed The Rocketeer. I would maybe throw in the first Captain America movie into that pulpy conversation.
I would have to say I go on record to say that the first Captain America film, Captain America: The First Avenger,
Mhm.
is one of my most favorite films. Like probably easily top 10, most likely top
Oh wow,
5.
yeah, that's a good one.
And I love that 40s sort of feel that they give.
Hmm.
I would also say that the newer Jumanji films give a bit of that sense of pulp energy.
Hmm.
But yeah, other than that though, we're not putting out pulp media anymore, and it makes me so sad.
Exactly, and I just love a movie that is set in the 40s or 50s, or really any time period in the past. Like it could be the 1600s, like the Pirates of the Caribbean, where there's a group of good guys with maybe one main good guy, but he's got his allies, and there's a group of bad guys with a villain that is just chewing the scenery. Your Drax's, your Captain Barbossa's, whatever Nazi or Kate Blanchett it happens to be in an Indiana Jones movie. That's one thing I loved about the new Indiana Jones movie. Mads Mikkelsen was incredible. Like he was like, I was like, cool, we're back. Like Mads Mikkelsen is doing his thing. Let's have more advent. And when rewatching this movie, as I did the other night, I was like, man, I have missed this. So like, what about this movie? Do you love? Like, do you have a special spot in your heart for this movie because it has all those things like I do?
I would say that what it does for me the most, I think it's very clear about the morality that it holds.
Hmm.
And then there's another level of it where it's very unclear about the morality that it holds. And I love that layer too. You had mentioned that the whole fight is just against capitalists, right?
Yes.
It's against capitalists and megalomaniacs, and they even make they make the comparison between Xander Drax and what is about to happen with World War II. It's during the boardroom scene that they make that comparison,
Mhm.
or the boardroom scene, or no, it's Uncle Dave. Uncle Dave is the one that makes that comparison.
Right.
Yeah. So there is that first layer of like, no, like you always do good, you always fight injustice, you always make sure to help, right? But then that under layer of like, no, this guy is just rampantly trying to make money and is trying to create and discover things from indigenous cultures in order to benefit his own life, right?
Right.
And you mentioned it, like Kit is very focused on, like he's very at home when he comes back to New York City, right? He dresses the part. He has he might not feel rich, but he has the money because of all the jewels, right? Like,
yeah.
But it feels as if he is more at home in the jungle.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do the whole, oh, I'm going to live like a double life. Like, no, he is married, for lack of a better term, to the mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And all that stuff, he's kind of coming in. It's like a Bruce, like it's a Batman Bruce Wayne thing once again. But like I said, he's very rarely Bruce Wayne.
He's usually
Batman. He's really at home when he's in the jungle, just jumping through windows of his version of Commissioner Gordon there and fighting off fighting off treasure hunters. Like these bad dudes. But as the movie says, evil in all forms. And it does a lot to kind of build up this character. Like you understand why he's the Phantom, why he's doing it. It's this family mantle he's got. The world building, I think, surrounding him and this whole movie is very impressive. I love, like we already talked about, like it's been 400 years. You get the backstory with like his father, was like, you've got his ghost dad apparently, and like I love the way he kind of comes in. And then you tie that into the villains where you have a character who, like as we said, the James Remar character, how he was the one who killed his dad, and like he's like the ghost who walks, I killed him, I stuck, and he's got that same knife, and they kind of have that great showdown at the end before. And I love that it gives you, I know I'm kind of rambling, but it gives you that great moment where he gets to beat him up and fight him, but the Phantom would like never just straight up like murk a guy. And he gets blown up by his own boss, by Drax, and there's that great showdown with the Force Skull that comes out. Yeah, it looks like what was that?
To be clear,
yeah,
I don't think the Phantom murks anybody with a name. He is murking dudes left and right. He is carrying two 1911s.
That's true.
Do you know what those pistols are known for?
Murking motherfuckers.
Okay, so I have to give a firearm lesson because firearms are they're like I'm a bit nerdy about them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is wild. During the Philippine-American War, the U.S. military went on record to say Filipinos are too hard to kill. We need a bigger bullet. The only gun that had a bigger bullet at the time were revolvers, and these are like Colt 1878, something like that, and they carried a 45 caliber shell, right? Oh, 45 caliber bullet, excuse me. So they had to like take out the guns that were already in production and they had to put these very old guns into production because Filipinos were too hard to kill. So then they were like, oh, hey, we can't keep using these revolvers because there's only 6 bullets in this. And like, this is not happening, right?
Yeah.
So this actually leads to around the First World War of the development of the 1911. And that's the gun that was used. So the 1911 is specifically because my people are too tough to kill.
And I will recommend, if you want to know more about that, read How to Hide an Empire. Great fucking book. Goes into a lot of that shit.
Oh,
Really interesting
nice!
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but he carries 2 1911s, and okay, he does this thing where he crosses his arms in order to shoot, and then he uncrosses them, and I'm like, why, man? Like,
Because it's badass, Jason. It's badass. All right. No, it's so funny that you bring that because I remember like watching this. I was watching this movie with my roommate, who's like a younger guy. He's like 21, so he didn't even know what this movie was. Right, he wasn't even alive when it came out. And I'm like, you know what? You're gonna love this movie. It's great. It's pulpy, but it's a lot of fun. It's like not a comedy, but it's very funny. And like the Phantom is great, right? He's basically Batman in the 30s. And we're watching this movie, and it's that scene where he goes on the boat and he pulls out those 2 911 and he goes, "The Phantom is strapped?" And I was like, yeah, dude.
Yep.
And not only that, he has a fucking sidekick that's just a wolf. It's incredible.
Yeah, his dog is a wolf. He has a horse he has a horse that can talk to the wolf.
Yes,
there is a
so
scene.
Great.
There is a scene where they talk to each other.
He's like, yeah, it's like so good. Like he's like, oh, go get that horse or whatever. And the wolf goes over, barks something, and then the horse is like, cool, got it. He's flying on the plane. Got to go get him. It's so dumb, but so like it's so earnest at the same time. How could you not love it? You know?
Ah, so good.
But yeah, all that I think is him having the guns, him having the wolf, him seeing the guy with the tattoo, which ties back into the Sang Brotherhood, and the main bad guy is in the same, but this guy is, and then they go at the end and they see, Cary Fukunaga, or sorry, Cary. I'm so bad with names.
I got you. It's Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa.
Thank you. And all that world building, both with the good guys and bad guys, it lends itself to what you were saying before. Of it all feels very real. It doesn't feel like this is just a thing that exists, and I think part of that comes from this was based on a comic strip that had been running, pretty much written by one guy since the 30s up until the 90s. So it all feels you believe it, you know.
It's such a what I think I get so bummed out about is that the Phantom was such an incredible labor of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
This film released 60 years after its first ever comic strip, right?
Right.
Lee Falk, one of the creators, because they credit Lee Falk, but they don't credit. I think is it Roy Moore or Ray Moore? Yeah, I think it's Roy Moore. Roy Moore is the very first artist on the Phantom, and so it's the whole Bill Finger situation, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, writers get the credit, but artists don't, and that's a whole thing. And they actually named a character after them as well, because the butler in the mansion scene for the Palmers, his name in it is Falkmore, so it's Lee Falk and Roy Moore.
Oh, okay. And yes, it is Ray Moore. I did double check.
Ray Moore.
Yeah, Ray Moore.
And so, by the way, did you recognize the mansion?
No.
That's the Playboy Mansion, Derek.
Oh man.
They rented out the Playboy Mansion in order to have this. In order to have this film. Like, if that's not like pure 90s excess, I don't know what is at this point, right?
Right. Yeah, because this movie it had, for the time, a pretty big budget, and it did not make its money back, did not do well critically. I think today it's a little bit of a cult hit, but like, even going on Letterboxd, I was surprised it has like an under 3 rating on Letterboxd, and a lot of these movies that have kind of come around have higher ratings. I think this one's starting to become a cult classic, but it's not quite there yet. Like, what do you think this film is going to come around, or why do you think it missed at the time?
I think it missed because, well, Billy Zane was a little bit well known, but not. I mean, like, he wasn't like Brad Pitt level at this point.
Right.
So I would say that the audience's perception of the leading man in it, I think, was a little bit skewed. I love Billy Zane in this. I think his choice to play both like a two-fisted character, but also be so polite in very quiet moments in the film. I love that choice. I love that choice so much. But I think it was like a little bit of star power. I think it was also a little bit of marketing.
Right.
And then honestly, I also think it was a bit of word of mouth,
Yeah.
with critics. And I mean, at this time, right, we were receiving critical reception from like, say, for example, like At Night with Siskel and Ebert, or we were receiving it, the next day in newspapers, right? I think the critical word of mouth when it came to paid professional critics was very unkind.
Yeah, and I think it comes out in the wake of Batman, where I think the way, like you said, I think it's mismarketed. I think that what studios were wanting was just the straight up next Batman. I think that's the same
Yes.
reason that the Phantom gets made. I think it's a big part of the reason the Rocketeer gets made, and I think that that's not necessarily the movie that these people are making. They're making things that are less goofy and Tim Burton-y and much more earnest, like we've talked about. And I think
Right.
that really resonates with some people, but if you go in expecting a dark creature of the night making a bunch of quips and stuff like that, and you get this guy who's, I mean, I said he's like Batman, but his persona is much more Superman-esque, where he's more of a Boy Scout than a Batman. And like he does probably murk some people, like we said, but he has his code of honor. Like that's the thing that really matters to this guy, is like ultimately doing the right thing and fighting evil and going up against the Singh Brotherhood and trying to find a way to like preserve the family line, like. And I don't know that in the 90s, which were, I think, a more or less kind of cynical decade, if that was the audience was really going to be there for it.
No, I think that is a perfect way to encapsulate it.
And so, with that being said, we've talked a little bit about it being a cult classic, some people coming around to it. There's been like a TV show, I think, where he even came back. Or maybe I'm thinking of the Rocketeer. Never mind. But there is still a groundswell, I think, of people who liked it. There was like a sci-fi movie that didn't do very well and stuff like that.
So there were two things of the Phantom after this, I believe. It was the Phantom 2040, which was the cartoon.
Right.
And that got pushed. So this is wild, right? They pushed the Phantom into 2040. And after the Resource Wars, and he's in like New York, and it's like this whole thing where like it is about like class inequality. And it for the time, I don't think that they pushed hard enough, and that's why I think that's why a lot of people forgot about it. But then I believe it was Sci-Fi that put out a 2010 reboot where they made fun of the suit and then made a very military-esque 2010 sort of like super soldier suit for him. It's a whole thing. Yeah.
I think that falls into the thing of like because this suit is, and maybe that's another thing audience reacted to. The suit it's goofy, It's goofy in a way that I love, but I feel like at the time people didn't dig. There's that famous line in like how they made the X-Men where all that like black leather into like what would you prefer, yellow spandex, which finally we got, the X-Men 97 turned that line on its head in such an incredible way. And now superheroes can be bright and colorful and wear their yellow suits, or in this case their purple suits. But I was like, at the time, really, other than Superman, which had been a couple decades before, your superheroes weren't colorful. Batman was like was the fan. He's just dark. He's got like a little yellow circle. They're expected to be dark and cool and everything in a way that like a big purple suit that covers the top of your head and you wear like a domino mask. It's not cool, but I think that people today would really appreciate that, which leads me to the question: if this does get a legacy sequel, a reboot, something like that, would you like to see it, and what would you like to see?
I would like to see very soft updates to the suit. I think it would be outright irresponsible to expect somebody to fit into that suit like Billy Zane fits into that
Right.
suit, right? Everything. I look at that suit on screen, and there is not one wrinkle out of place. It is
Mhm.
unreasonable how Billy Zane wore the Phantom suit, right?
Yeah.
So I'd want to see like a few updates, you know? We see this, okay, you brought up one of my favorite films, Captain America, The First Avenger,
Mhm.
right? And we get to see in a very tongue-in-cheek way like the evolution of the Captain America suits, because
Right.
the terrible Captain America suit, like that's the one that he uses on stage, and that's like his theater suit, right? And then we move into not modern, like retro modernizing the suit
Mhm.
to actually be in the field. I would want to see something like that. Maybe a little bit softer, but I would want to see some soft finish, like some soft modernized finishes to it.
For sure. And so I agree with that. I think that like just up giving it a few tweaks, giving a little like not overhauling it, but giving it a few tweaks makes sense. In terms of like the movie itself, though, what do you want to see? Do you want to see a legacy sequel? Do you want to see like recast Kit Walker? Let's do it again. What would you like? Avenue would you like?
I am such a sucker for cameos. I
Hmm.
know that, like, you know, as somebody who acts as a critic and a professional in the space, right? There are certain things that when we enjoy them, it other critics will look down on us.
Right. The serotonin hits. I get it.
Yeah. And so oh gosh, I'm sorry, I completely lost track because of this. Oh, okay. So I love cameos, right?
Mhm.
So I would love to see a Billy Zane cameo, right? I'd
Right.
love to see a Catherine Zeta Jones cameo, right?
Hmm.
What I would want to do is I would want to set it in like 1938, 1939 again. Um I don't want to be honest, I don't really want to see like a modernized take and version of it, right?
Hmm.
Because you know what's going to happen, right? Like he's going to be a cop, or he's going to be a private investigator or
Right.
something like that, right? And so I think there is an earnestness, right, into just being a dude in the 30s who fell off the face of the earth in order to take care of his family business, right?
Hmm. No, I totally get that. And here's my pitch, right? So I look at he is the 21st Phantom. I did want
Oh,
to double check.
21st. Thank you
21st.
for the yeah.
Yes. So my pitch is this is a legacy sequel. Have it be set in the 50s or something like that. So it's still old
Okay.
time. It's about as far away like from the 30s word to the 90s, the 2020s to the 50s roughly speaking. Have it be the 22nd Phantom. Have Billy Zane be the ghost dad.
Okay, okay.
That's my pitch. I would love to see him be in that role of like, oh, I did this myself, and have him kind of give the sage advice in the same way that the his dad, the 20th Phantom, the Patrick McGowan character,
Mhm.
does. That's what I would really love to see.
So I'm trying to think plot wise now, right?
Mm.
Okay, this is in the 50s after World War II. Did the 21st Phantom just get murked like against the Nazis or something like that?
Yeah, maybe that's what. Yeah, he goes up and gets killed by some. I think you have it do something like how the 20th Phantom is like, oh yeah, he got me in the bag or something. Like have him say like he died in World War II or something like that, like fighting Nazis looking for some artifacts. Like Nazis were always looking for artifacts. That's one thing we know from Captain America and Indiana Jones.
Yeah, so then we would then have a Phantom who grew up basically without a dad.
Hmm. Yeah,
And to get to explore the idea of legend when it comes to both where you know personally the accolades of your father, but also at the same time having to live up to the legend of it as well. I think there's an interesting story there. Of course, we might have to go a little bit like Red Scare because it's the 50s and all that. And so I'd want to see how that would go. I
yeah,
was
yeah.
also thinking when you mentioned the 50s, I was like, what about the 60s?
We could do that. That could work too. I think that's about the same. Yeah, that would be, I guess, temporally more appropriate from.
Well, like,
Yeah.
let's do the 60s and then
Okay.
let's have this idea of like a fisted adventurer having to figure out how to solve problems without their fists.
Mm.
Because you know the 60s known for hippies, known for the summer
Right.
of love, like all this, and to have this sort of like I would love a hippie villain. Like, I know that's dumb, but like, I would love one of those, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then just, but have the whole idea be like, okay, no, there are times where the Phantom is right for the time and place, and there are times where the Phantom has to evolve and meet the demands of the world around them.
Yeah, I think you're hit on something really well, and I think I might this might not be a popular opinion, but that's one thing I really liked about the more recent Indiana Jones movie is that it was set in the '60s, and I think it did touch on a lot of the things you were talking about. And I think that having a Phantom movie in that same time period, dealing with some of the same issues of being this kind of like outdated figure, and where does he place in a world that maybe no longer needs the Phantom could be an interesting thing. And dealing with like the legacy of his father, you have Billy Zane there. Maybe give Catherine Zeta-Jones a cameo who she'd be like, "Oh, your father was very handsome too," like that. Something like that. That would be cool.
So okay, I do have to say though, you had mentioned the latest Indiana Jones film, and I think something that is missing, especially from films that are trying to capture that magic of like pulp media, I think I think filmmakers might get too in the weeds about the camp of everything.
Mm.
Because I think you need to hit. I think there is a sweet spot when it comes to how campy the story is going to be, right?
Hmm.
One of my favorite scenes is that the Phantom pulls out his guns when he's in that submarine looking for Diana, right?
Hmm.
And he kicks open the door, and he's like, and he says like, "All right, fellas," and it's all women
Yeah.
showering, and the very first thing he does is put away his guns, avert his eyes, and apologize to everybody. That's so good, right?
Yeah.
That's so good. And then like the women just start blasting.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the great. That's the best part of it is that they are like, oh, here's this old fashioned guy. He's trying to be, and they're just like, we're badasses. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, and it's this it's such a great juxtaposition because you're
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, like in like newer films, he would like if this was like a gritty reboot, like he'd tie them all up and they'd all be naked on screen or something like that, right?
Yeah.
No, there is a there was a level of camp to it that was acceptable as much as it was fun.
Yeah. It absolutely hits that sweet spot between, as we kind of said before, being too reverent to the source material, too campy, too over the top, but also not overdoing it and making it like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Look at how silly these things were. Look how, because it does really respect them. I think it does respect these old serials. It does respect the comics that it came from. It knows where it came from.
Mhm.
But yeah, with that all said, are there any before we wrap up? Are there any last thoughts on the Phantom that you had here?
The fact that we haven't had a reboot or a legacy sequel or something like that is outright insane to me. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's prime. This
Mhm.
is prime time to put out something that is both familiar and different. I think if this would have came out, like let's say, I think what was it, Captain America: The Winter Soldier? I think that was 2010.
The Winter Soldier was 14,
Oh,
I want to say.
excuse me, not the Winter Soldier, the first Avenger. Excuse me,
2011, I want to say.
2011. Okay,
Yeah.
so around that time frame, right? If we would
Mhm.
have also released something like the Phantom again around that time, I think it could. I think it would have spawned its own separate, for lack of a better term, indie sort of franchise because it's not
Mm.
under like it's not under Disney, it's not under Warner Brothers, any of that. It'd be under Paramount, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
I think they own
Paramount
this movie.
movie. I watched this on Paramount Plus, I think.
Okay, which is so funny because I have Paramount Plus and I watched it on Max, thinking like, oh no, I can't find it anywhere else.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, which who knows if Paramount Plus is even going to still be a thing by the time this episode releases. There's a
I'm
whole
in the
bunch going on with Paramount right now.
I'm in the minority. I really like Paramount Plus.
It's
I
great.
also I
It's
also
great.
just love so like some inside baseball. They are incredible supporters of nonprofits like Comic Con International,
Mm.
and I've spoken to some of the executives before. They're wonderful, passionate people. I just wish they had more to put on this, right?
Yeah.
Because I love Star Trek. I love like Yellowstone's killing it as well too, right? But like, man, I want more Paramount stuff.
Yeah, no shade meant to the fine people at Paramount. It's just like they're probably going to be bought by Skydance or somebody in the next week or two.
Oh no! Don't tell me
Look,
that.
I would rather have them bought by Skydance than a lot of the other potential people that are
That's
looking at
fair.
getting them. But yeah, I mean, Paramount Plus is rad. I just watched The Cage, which is like the original pilot of Star Trek that is just like on there. It's part like you go to watch like Star Trek the original
Ooh.
series. It's listed as the first episode, and you're like, this is it's like really interesting and cerebral, and had like a woman be the second in command, which is of course why they're like redo this without being as smart and with no ladies, please. And so of course, but it's neither here nor there. But yeah, I'll just say one last time, I freaking love The Phantom. This is a movie that holds a special place in my heart. Young Derek would watch this movie religiously, and going back to it for this, I was like, man, I have missed this movie. It's a truly special film. I love action adventure movies, and maybe one day soon we'll be lucky enough to get some kind of reboot for it. But yeah, thank you JPG for coming on. This was a blast. Before you go, please let the people know one more time all the stuff you're doing, where they can find you, because I know you are a busy. I barely even had time to talk to you, so you're a busy man.
I do appreciate you having me on and putting up with my schedule as well too.
No trouble.
Thank you again for everything, and thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Once again, I am JPG. I'm a pop culture educator and consultant. You can find me on social media at SpeakerJPG, and you can find my consultancy firm Intermyth at intermyth.org or at intermyth_ on social media.
Very nice, very nice. And thank you, yeah, one more time for coming on. Everybody out there, if you're a fan of JPGs, this is the first time you're listening to this, I would love for you guys to stick around, check out some more episodes, check out some back episodes. This has, of course, been the Underrated Movie Podcast. I do a couple other things as well, including Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, which is my podcast on the MCU. So by the time this comes out, I would have already, I guess I have talked about Deadpool and Wolverine at this point. I also do one every other Monday when this doesn't come out on just kind of movies in general, where I'm the co-host, my buddy Damien, and that is called the Midnight Film Society, so definitely check that podcast out as well if you are so inclined. And everybody listening, we have a Patreon as well, patreon.com/underrated movie podcast, called Underrated Disc 2. There's a bunch of stuff, bonus stuff there, including a bonus podcast, including episodes coming out a week early and ad-free there. There's options to sign up for as low as $1 a month. So would love to see you guys there, or just follow us on any of the social media outlets. Underrated Movie Podcast everywhere. But yeah, one more time, Jason, this has been a blast, and yeah, I'll see everybody out there next time.
Thank you so much.